All right. Well, welcome everybody. This is Spotlight number 2, and this is our second session of the afternoon. So thank you so much for joining. If you're not supposed to be here and you're like, I'm in the wrong spot, this is not who I wanted to hear speak, you won't offend me if you drop off, I promise. Today's session is around women leading courageous conversations around legacy giving. And here in our community, we've piloted this and we've had immense success that I'm really proud of. So I'm delighted to be here to speak about that with you today. This is an interactive, engaging session. I love for people to come off mute, to put stuff in the chat, engage. Let's open up dialogue because we can all learn from one another. I shared previously, our communities have so many similarities, but so many differences at the same time, and unique challenges, and sometimes not so unique challenges. So it's great when we have a time like this to share with one another and to talk about the challenges we face and the successes that we've seen and share those ideas. It's kind of been wild. I had this, great connection when the rabbi opened earlier, and she mentioned that Jews are storytellers, because a big piece of this in being able to speak to women and engage them in the plan giving conversation does revolve around storytelling. Not only me as a storyteller, as a Jewish development professional, but in teaching my donors, volunteers, and lay leaders how to tell their story, how to find the impact in their story that will inspire others. And that's important here. But in addition to that, I was inspired to create this presentation. I'm a student in the CAP program. And in our first semester, we did a case study on a dad who left a $12 million trust to his only daughter. However, the trust had stipulations that required her to finish school and get a job. 2 things of which she had never planned for in her life, never thought about doing, and didn't want to do. It's been years since her father passed, and she would rather live like a pauper in near poverty than make his wishes come true to get the access to the $12 million. The biggest thing for me was, why didn't they talk about this? Because who ends up getting the $12 million? The government? Like, what will happen to it? Charities won't benefit. The daughter's life will not benefit. And it really frustrated me to think I couldn't ask the deceased man, did you not talk to your daughter about this before you passed away? And that's really hard to digest. So I was truly inspired to put this presentation together and to inspire individuals to have those conversations. I have a few more examples that I'll share with you as we move into the session. But having the conversation, being willing to do it, but also knowing how to do it is critical. All right, JF&A requires me. They actually gave me this next slide here. We have some rules today. So please be respectful. Understand we all have unique communities. And we are here today to actively engage and participate in this program. We will do some peer-to-peer sharing and learning. And everything that's shared might not work in your community. It could work if you tried it. It might not work if you tried it. And today we're really just here to explore that conversation and not get into any heated arguments or debates. Hand raising, totally welcome. Feel free to interrupt me in the middle of the presentation. If you put something in the chat, also, that's great. I would love a volunteer to monitor the chat because I was supposed to have this guy named Steve, but he didn't show up. So if someone will, give me a shout if something appears in the chat and I missed it, I totally appreciate that. All right, so I have a warm-up activity. Everyone excited? It's like an icebreaker, right? We start every meeting with a little bit of an icebreaker. So I have 1 orange, but 2 people want and need the orange. Help me solve the problem. What should I do? Take yourself off mute, put it in the chat, whatever you're comfortable with. Just remember, you're being recorded. Nobody wants to answer, help me solve this problem? Cut it in half. All right, Jill, what would you do?
Cut it, share it.
Share it, cut it in half.
Yes.
Anyone else? Any ideas? Anyone? No one? I don't want to call on you. Offer it to the other person. Oh, wow. Just give it away. Don't, yeah, okay. So can we ask some different questions rather than just try to solve the problem? Let's ask some other questions. What question could we ask?
Does anybody else want or need the orange?
Why do they each want it? David Schneider, I love it. Thank you so much. What do you want the orange for? Melissa, great. We need to ask questions before we jump in and try to have the plan. The same thing can be applied to plan giving. It could even be applied to annual giving. We need to ask more questions. So person A actually needs the orange. She needs the slices to make a citrus salad. Person B, he needs the peel for the zest, just for the flavor. So we can solve the problem for both and give them what they want with one orange. We just need to learn to ask different questions. All right. Thumbs up on that icebreaker, thumbs down. I totally stole it. Are you ready? I don't know if any of you have heard Commander Alexa Jenkins speak. She's the first Jewish woman to command a naval battleship. We had an event with her earlier this week because she's actually stationed here in Northeast Florida at our Navy base. And she used this as her icebreaker in how to solve problems. And I asked her, I said, can I borrow that? I like that better than my icebreaker. So you all got a fresh icebreaker. All right, today's objective. Again, if you realize you're in the wrong session, you won't offend me, jump off. Today's objective is to explore alternate ways to engage women in the plan giving conversation, utilizing the understanding that women are gaining control of wealth at a greater rate than ever before. This is a fact. I did not make this up. You have people that will inherit twice, the boomer generation. They will inherit from their parents. They will inherit from their spouses, especially as women trend and tend to live longer than their spouses. So we need to recognize the power of women in influencing short and long-term philanthropic decisions. We have to do it. We need to pivot and have those conversations, but also to help empower them by asking different questions and speaking to the woman differently than we spoke to the man. This does not mean dumbing it down. This means just being willing to ask different questions that resonate and inspire a different response from a different gender. Alana and I were actually recently in Israel together, and we did this incredible activity around generational differences. How you speak to a millennial donor versus how you speak to a boomer donor can be very different. And if you ask them different questions and inspire them in different ways, you might get greater gifts from both. So you can apply that same logic to gender as you can generational. One thing will remain true for women, whether we are career women, whether we are mothers, whether we are aunts, whether we are proud dog owners, whether we are petless, single, never married, no kids, and community activists. It does not matter. Across the board, this statement can apply to women. Women are community builders. Women rally other people together. Women volunteer. They look at Norma. Everyone knows Norma. Look at what Norma did for women in the 70s to empower women to come to the giving table and have their own identity. So, as a woman myself, I find I am stretched beyond belief between my career, my son's school, my son's soccer team, my husband's life, my neighborhood, my HOA, I mean, you name it. I want to be involved in everything and I don't want to say no. And we all know women like that. However, when it comes to being at the table, when the family's estate plan is written, studies show that the majority of women are not there historically. They have not been present for that conversation. In my own family, as my grandfather's will was read in 2006, my Nana and my mother were in shock. They were asked to share assets. Assets would be pre-assigned to my grandfather's children and grandchildren, and they would need to work collaboratively with my Nana to maintain those assets. These two women that were so close, traveled together, vacationed together, played bingo together, you name it, have not spoken in 14 years. Within 2 years of my own grandfather's passing, my mother and my Nana were embattled in a court dispute that eventually dragged my older brother into it as well. This is crushing and changed the dynamic of our family. It changed the dynamic of holidays. It changed so much. During my first 90 days in my role overseeing the Jewish Foundation, I oversaw the settling of an estate where I had a seat at the table. It was brand new. I hardly knew all the players. I knew the estate planning attorney. I knew the witnesses. I was like, where's the widow? She wasn't present to hear her own husband's will read. We discovered the estate would be divided into 3 parts. A $15 million estate, one piece given to a secular charitable organization out of state, 1/3 to the Jewish Foundation to benefit our local Jewish community center and provide a scholarship for summer camp, and 1/3 would remain with the wife. Now I know why she wasn't there. She was never informed of this before her husband passed away. She didn't know it was coming. And when she was informed, she was angry. Where was her seat at the table when those decisions were made? This happened just a couple years ago. I'm sure more of these will unfold right in front of my eyes. Not only did she not choose to be present, she never stepped foot in our JCC ever again. She remained a gift annuity client of mine and would never take a phone call, would return to sender my Passover cards. We never once had a conversation after this event. Countless children will benefit from her husband's generosity. The scholarship is not just for Jewish children, but all children who want access to our summer camp and early childhood programs. And it is an incredible gift that we will forever be proud of, but it comes stained with that piece that I will never forget. That also inspires the work that I do. So whether someone's estate is worth 100,000 or 100 million or somewhere in between, people must have these conversations while they're still alive. If not, it leaves prints on us, like I just described. It tarnishes our reputation and damages relationships. If we don't know what the people that we love and what our donors even care about, where those desires come from, what morals, what principles, what ethics are they built on, they're likely to not be respected. And for me, a big piece of my job is ensuring that whatever the donor put in writing before they passed, and I'm tied to that planned gift and making sure that it is fulfilled, I want to ensure their wishes come to life. Even if I think when they were written 30 years ago, they were a little off the wall and probably don't fit today's world, that's what they wanted. And donor intent is what matters. It's no different than when a woman says, I'm leaving this to one child and this to another. The problem is if they don't share that and they don't talk about their ethics, their morals, their interests, where they've invested their time, their talents, their treasures, and why they want to do what they do, if they don't have that conversation, we can't do it for them. Circumstance that compelled us to act is not singular. There were lots of them. But we were certainly catapulted into this as we read so many stories about women controlling wealth and doing more giving, right? Let's look at Mackenzie Scott. Her husband didn't pass away. It was a divorce that resulted in her giving billions of dollars away. Women are gaining control of wealth at a far greater rate and pace than ever before. 40% of global wealth is under the control of women, and that is expected to grow year over year. In addition, studies show women are more likely to give. Across all income levels, rich and poor, women are more likely to give. Always remember that. But in your federation or foundation, if you were to take every donor on the donor list and see who was solicited, what percentage is male and what percentage is female? Who made the ask to the husband? Who didn't even think to bring the woman to the table or invite them? Maybe they'd say no, but were they invited to even come to the table for just the annual campaign ask? Women give differently and women are inspired to give differently. But dollars are being left on the table because we forever have used a one-size-fits-all approach, at least in the plan giving space. I want to give credit where credit is due. We have certainly changed our strategies when it comes to other areas. Like obviously we have women's philanthropy and the pomegranate and the Pearl Society and the lion, and these are all beautiful pieces of jewelry. But did we change the conversation? Did we change the questions we ask? I'm not sure. So don't worry about taking screenshots or anything like that. I think we're going to give you these presentations so that you'll have them and you'll be able to read all of this data. I hate slides with lots of words, but I took some of these screenshots from my class last semester and I was like, these are incredible. They have to be shared because it's so very true. You know, women's giving alliances across the country, whether Jewish or secular or Christian, they are thriving. Women love to get together in a group and have impact, whether it's social impact, or I actually have a grant fund. We give away money to beautify Jewish facilities. Like, you want artwork, you want to redo some walls, you want to make something more inviting. Yeah, I run a grant committee to do that because that's important to a group of women, and we do it. We also do social impact and other things, but so with that said, let's go into the plan giving conversation and where some of the differences lie. So what I have here on your screen is results of a study when it came to bequest giving and where the differences are in men and women when they pass. So women, obviously, far more likely to be widowed because they're outliving their male counterparts. However, because historically have not been the breadwinners in two-income households, the income that remains is far less. And I think many of us have seen it. How many have seen the husband pass and all of a sudden the gift gets cut? But we know the husband left the wife okay. However, the gift gets cut because there is a fear of outliving those assets. There's a fear of, what do I do now? He's gone. I mean, I'm the biggest feminist I can think of, but I would probably have that fear too. What do I do now that he's gone? It's a normal fear. It's part of the grieving process, and we all see it. I am very proud to report that we had 3 female donors who had cut over the last 4 or 5 years when their husbands passed. Not only did they increase their giving either back to where it was or greater, one, upon the passing of her husband within a couple of years, also fully funded her Lion of Judah gift in an endowment. And she went through these same fears. Women, they love to give and they give more, but they spread it to more charities. I see this in some of the women donor advised funds that I manage. They give smaller amounts to a greater number of organizations because, like we talked about before, we spread ourselves so thin. We do so much. I have so many groups I'm involved with in so many different organizations. Men tend to be more black and white. They're looking at growth of an estate and ensuring wealth for generations, even if that wealth is not substantial. They want to make sure they pass it down in their lineage. They want to provide for family first over anything else because they aren't necessarily, and again, I want to make no blanket statements. There are 2 men on my son's school's PTA. I mean, there's 80 women, but there's 2 men. And so I don't want to say this blanketly, right? Like, it doesn't fit everybody. It's just about the majority. Men are also more interested in what's the best tax benefit. They're not necessarily thinking about where can I have the most impact within an organization? What's best for our family? All right, so of course, aren't we already doing this? Yes, as I mentioned, we're doing this. We have all these gorgeous pieces of jewelry, although I don't know about the top right. It's not my favorite. But we are doing it. We've engaged women. I mean, we're also a national study. Like, I'm just waiting for this to happen in my class, but Norma is an icon. And in the 70s, to bring women to the giving table at a major gift level and to engage them with their own symbol and their own society and to grow to the size it has, amazing. But what about the planned giving conversation? And what about engaging those women on a more substantial level about impact and change and the future and securing Jewish tomorrows? So, of course, we launched Loge 25 and it was awesome. I was there. I was in Hollywood, Florida for that conference. It was incredible. We had 12 women attend from our very small community, and we had 3 or 4 new Forever Lions come out of it, and we were proud. But that's where it started for us. That's where, like, we need to pivot. We need to change how we're doing this, and we need to grow our engagement with women. So we did. We pivoted. And it took, this is not a small, short time process. This isn't something you can go home and we're doing this tomorrow and it'll be done in 3 weeks. That's not how it worked. It was very simple, however. I repeat, very simple, not rocket science. No one is leaving here with like a master's or a PhD. This was simple. We examined our relationships because, as I shared in the opening session, during the pandemic early on, we also discovered our 30-plus-year exec announcing his retirement. His replacement would be recruited and he would leave. Well, after 30 years, how many relationships do you think he held? And as a 70-something-year-old man, how many of those relationships do you think were male? We knew we needed to pivot. We needed to look at the women that were not at the table. We needed to engage the ones that were, but engage with them differently. We didn't want the same old, same old. You're not just here to make soap or to do a food drive or to plan a women's philanthropy event. You're here for so much more. We need you at the allocations table. We need you on grant making committees, not just for beautifying spaces, but also for driving social impact and change. So we identified a handful and we started there. Let's try to build some relationships. And of course, the pandemic hit us and it was harder to interact with people, but we do live in Florida, so a little easier than the rest of you. I don't want to cry me a river over here. Like, we had it a lot easier, but we also returned to the office June of 2020, full-time and in full force, masked and vaccinated. It was a different climate. And that's why I say we have so many similarities, but also so many differences. Our in-person came back much sooner than many of you may have experienced. So we picked these women, we started meeting with them, we started engaging with them, we started putting them on impact grant making committees, bringing them to the allocations table, moving them out of just women's philanthropy or just this space, but really driving change for how we had conversations with them and where they felt like they didn't just need to come to the social event or sign in to hear Vicki Agron speak, which was moving and amazing and inspired so many people, but they belong in other places too. And so we did it. And over the course of 18 months while we were doing it, we relied on telling their stories. We relied on telling family stories, single women stories, couple stories, forever lion stories. We were pushing stories out there into the community, writing them behind the scenes with their permission. They were being pushed out on social media, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, E-Blast, the Jewish Life magazine that used to come out monthly. These stories were sprinkled everywhere, and every story sprinkled in 3 different ways. We did stories about next gen teenagers doing grant making to working with their grandparents to award grants. We wanted people to read these stories and feel inspired, but also connect with them and say, they're just like me. They're not like Bill Gates or Jeff Bezos or Mackenzie Scott. Like, they're normal, everyday people, and they're leaving legacies. They have funds. They're doing things in the community on a philanthropic level. And if they can do it, I can do it too. And so in 1 year's time, we, I think, had 21 new players come to the table to engage with Foundation. We have nearly doubled our Forever Lion numbers. And for us, this is incredible. So the first event we ever did, boutique style, intimate, short and sweet. We handpicked, invited women, no men were allowed to attend. We were trying to create a non-threatening, intimate space to only talk about starting the conversation. There was no ask, no pledge cards, no commitments. This is about talking to them about everything they've invested into the community, everything they've invested overseas, locally, secularly. It didn't matter. Let's get together and let's start that conversation. So boutique style, we had a host. There's no budget tied to this event. I know some of you are thinking like, I don't have a budget to do this kind of stuff. No budget, no expenses. We asked one of the women that was interested in this to host it in her beachfront condominium that is like a vacation home and no one's ever there. So it was an easy ask. She supplied the nosh. It was a morning event, so it was orange juice and fruit and things of that nature. It was not something she couldn't pull together on her own. We sat family style, looking out at the ocean, kind of circular, again, engaged, non-confrontational, no intimidation of like, we're going to do math, we're going to talk endowments, we're going to talk about your tax benefits. Maybe there's a donor advised fund that's right to you. No, the conversation didn't look like that at all. And for me, this was a big change. I have an all-male board. 85% of my fund holders, I only work with the man. So I'm saying this to you as like, this was my pivot. And I had to work with my women's philanthropy director because women are not my normal audience. I'm so used to working with the man and being blunt and straightforward and talking about the tax benefits. I had to do a major pivot. It was work. We also behind the scenes created a take-home workbook that we would introduce to them, but let them take home as their gift. We printed it in the office in color, bound it, put a hardcover on it. Again, very little expense. We bought the paper and the office supplies. No big print job at a print house. We did that. We did follow-ups. We kept engaging. Within 90 days of the first event, 6 of the 12 women had follow-up conversations. 3 opened funds, whether it was an endowment fund or a donor advised fund or a next gen fund for their grandchild having a bar mitzvah. The women that attended the event were of all ages. It was an eclectic group. A couple of them knew each other. A couple of them were meeting for the first time. They also spanned wealth backgrounds. A woman with a private plane was there talking about her and her husband just take off on the weekend in their private plane to the Bahamas. And a woman whose husband is a news anchor was there. And she's a stay-at-home mom with 2 kids. I mean, it spanned generations and it also spanned wealth backgrounds. It was incredible. So the opening of the event starts with storytelling. And everybody's like, why? I'm so sick of telling stories. Well, we had sprinkled these stories all throughout our marketing and communications materials about legacies and forever lions and endowment funds and grant making funds that we wanted people to hear about it because maybe they read about it. Maybe they didn't remember it. Maybe they would remember it. Maybe they would start to ask questions about it because now we were together in person. And the reason we do this is on the screen. Again, I didn't write this. I took this. This is factual. You know, humans are not ideally set up to understand logic. We're not black and white creatures. Storytelling resonates with us. It can inspire. This one story can inspire people 2 different ways. But stories help inspire people. They help connect people. And so we use those stories to do that. And we open the event with storytelling to connect people. At the beginning of this event, I told you something personal about my family. That was intentional to build trust with you, to build a connection with you, not to make you feel sorry for me or to share something embarrassing with you that would like have you give me pity. It was really meant to share with you, like, I've seen this firsthand, not just in my donor's life, but in my own family. And we're not a mega wealthy family, but I've witnessed it and it can be so ugly. It is truly for every single person, no matter the size of their estate. These conversations are important, but people don't know how to have them and or they're afraid to have them because I don't want to think about dying. All right, stories that describe a lasting and permanent impact on a community will always inspire and remind people of a value. In most cases, a Jewish value of theirs, and they're able to start talking about that for themselves. And so don't forget to not only make the story personal, but to connect the story in a way that is a parallel. You don't want to sit down with, you know, the everyday annual campaign donor. You know, maybe she's had on her horizon to be a lion for a few years and she's probably going to get there next year. But you don't want to sit down with her and tell her a story about Mackenzie Scott's planned gift, right? Those are 2 different situations. You want to share a story that resonates with her and that can connect her, someone that might inspire her that's in her same income category. Does that make sense? All right. So now I'm about to share some real life stories. Our marketing person is no longer with us, but we went through probably about 18 months of branded stories. And in addition to that, we did back page ads on our Jewish magazine, which were just excerpts of those stories. The hardest part for me in this pivot was she came into my office and she said, I love it, but these look like stock images. And I was like, well, of course they are. I got them off Fed Central. Like, what do you mean? And she just laid down the law and she said, I'm sorry, Kelly, no more stock images. This community is full of real people and we have real pictures. She didn't know that, you know, we had a situation where we got, you know, hacked and Russians wanted $1 million for all our event files for the last 25 years. And we just were like, we're not paying that. Like, we'll get new event photos. So we actually didn't have a ton of photos on file, but we found some. And When we shared that story with our community, they started submitting their Jewish photos to us. So we became wealthy again with real life pictures of people in our community and real life fund holders that could inspire and instill in other people the importance of legacy giving. And so in brief, I'll share with you the one with the father in the middle and his two daughters on the other side. And then that's him at his bar mitzvah when he was 13 years old. These daughters don't even live in our community. They live hundreds of miles away. They came to town for their dad's unveiling, and I asked to have a chance to speak with them. And when their father passed away, he left a modest gift. Let's say it was $30,000. Within 4 years, his fund, no thanks to the stock market, is nearly tripled in size. And that's because I've built a relationship with his daughters, and they continue to fundraise in their father's honor. They have very wealthy friends who make contributions annually in honor of him. On their birthdays, people make contributions into the fund. So in addition to the stories that we wrote about these people, we use them strategically throughout the year. So he was a Father's Day story. And we created a landing page where people wanting to honor fathers might make a contribution into his endowment fund. And people could give $18 if they wanted to, but they could use their credit card, make a gift to his endowment fund, and his daughters would be informed of that. This man lived in our community for almost 90 years and had so many friends and connections. Up here, I'll touch on this one. This is actually my son in preschool. Obviously, they're the Ima and the Abba, and he's holding the tzedakah, and they're on their way to shul on a Friday. The photo on the bottom, which was a story that we told, is of his great aunts and uncles and a woman that helped save his great grandmother during the Holocaust. She was one of the many women that hid his great grandmother for 7 years during World War II. And, these are just snippets, but again, it was the threefold approach of like, get it on social, get a full story done, and then remind them with a smaller piece. Obviously, we have Forever Lions. During the pandemic, we had our first 3 Forever Lions pass away and become fully funded. So for a community of our size to lose that many lions in 1 year, and also our first ones to pass away, was shocking. But those stories deserve to be told. And during a pandemic, it was so hard to communicate with people. We couldn't have an event to honor them. We couldn't do the things we might have normally done. So we told their stories, and we repeated those stories over and over again. And again, it worked for us. It might not work in your community, but Mitzi, our communications and marketing director at the time, was right. Real people resonate because I recognize that face and I can relate. They live in a house just like mine. They have regular jobs and they're normal people. They're not, Bill Gates or Jeff Bezos. They're just regular people like me. If they can do it, I can do it too. All right. So here we go. Now we've spent 1.5 years telling the stories and trying to resonate with people and connect with people. We've been having our individual one-on-one meetings. We are growing relationships and bringing more women to the table. And we've announced that we're hiring a new CEO, and it's a female, and we want everyone to meet her. Well, what do we do next? So we did the event. And at the event, we're like, well, they need a take home, right? Because every event has a take home. You got to give them something. What are we going to give them? I really hate meaningless take homes. So we made the workbook. The workbook was not only meant to be opened and explored at the event, but it was really meant to go home with them. And it's not just paper, it's got a plastic cover. It's meant to move around their house and be put in 17 different piles and move from one pile to the next, but to remind them to start the conversation. The cover was inspired by the chair of our women's philanthropy division. And, she had this vision in her mind, and she was like, could you put that on paper? And I was like, well, I have crayons, I could draw it, but it would probably be better done by a graphic designer. And we did it in-house. Our foundation manager was like, I'll use Canva or Adobe or whatever she used. And she made it. And we made it the cover of the workbook, and we included the exercises that are at the event. Obviously, you can't do all of them. I'm going to briefly walk you through the worksheets. But the worksheets are meant to go home with them, because a lot of these worksheets won't be done in a workshop. They'll be done at home with their family members, their adult children, their husbands, their partners, their sisters and brothers. Who knows? The people that mean the most to them that will be there to handle their estate are the people they need to be doing these worksheets with. It'd be great if they wanted to do all of them with you, but that's just not the case. Some of this stuff is really personal. But if you get the conversation started and they connect with you because you've shared something personal and meaningful, they might call you back, and or when you call them back to ask how it's going, or if they wanted to do like a refresher over coffee and look at that workbook again with you, they're more likely to say yes. So I'm sure show of hands, or I guess just give me a thumbs up with your reactions. Legacy cards, you've seen them, you've done them. I like them. They're not my favorite. They're kind of old school, but they're an easy icebreaker for any audience, especially if the audience is diverse, from grandmas to working women to stay-at-home moms to, single career women. You just don't know. You have a mix of people and you want to keep it simple. You don't want to overstimulate or try to overengage. So at this event, we did do the legacy cards, but like anytime you do the legacy cards, someone always picks one up and starts talking about a trip they went on 15 years ago. And you're like, that was not the purpose of this activity. And now we're on a tangent. So we have some others, right? You could even use the orange. In addition to the legacy cards, we created our own version of the 2164's Time, Talent, Treasure, and Ties worksheet. We made it more Jewish, and we try to have this conversation around their Jewish life, around their federation involvement, but also around the secular community and where they've invested their time, their talent, their treasure, their ties. Show of hands, who's done the 4 T's exercise? Or just give me a reaction in the chat if you're still there. So people have done this and they get it, and it's a standard tool in our development practices. But why not give them the worksheet and let them start to fill it out, right? We've done it at women's philanthropy meetings, and they all just leave it on the table and leave and go home. If you give it to them and they take it home and they're sitting there looking at it one day and they're like, what am I tied to? And they start making a list of all the things that have been important to them at different stages in their life. They start to think about all the things they've done, right? And as women, community builders, people that bring so much to the table and sometimes spread themselves so thin, they realize the lists in these boxes are so long. They've done so much. They're connected to so many different things. So then how do you narrow it down so that they can create a legacy or continue that conversation? Well, after you've broken the ice, you can take it to the next level. And this is harder, the ethical will. So we created a worksheet around the practice of drafting the ethical will. I know Vicki Agron, also an icon in the Federation world, does an incredible ethical will workshop, and as an outside third party has worked with individual donors to do these. She presented to our community, and so many women came and said, like, I want to do this. I like, the session was great, but now how do I do it? Like, what do I do? So now they have a worksheet, and they have a worksheet where they can take home and start drafting it. And if you've built a trusted, connected relationship with them, they are more likely to bring you in on that when they have a first draft and they want to look it over because they want to rewrite it, because this takes time. This isn't something you sit down and do like a school assignment and then it's over. This is something you sit down and do and then you tear it up because you didn't like it, and that's not what you want people to read after you're gone. But it's your story, right? And it's what you want people to know about you. When you start the ethical will workshop, which could be its own workshop, right? Like this one worksheet could be its own hour-and-a-half long conversation with women. Again, the book of worksheets, and we're going to give them all to you. You can customize them, edit them, change them, whatever you'd like. It's not meant to be a playbook of this is the set list of what you need to do. It's meant to be a book of options. Where could we start? What could we do? And can they take it home and can they work on it? And then can I call and follow up, right? Because as development professionals, we always want to leave something open for a follow-up. You need to have something to go back to. Don't do so much in the first conversation that you got nothing to follow up on. So the ethical will can be hard. It is very meaningful. If you haven't done an ethical will workshop, I would ask for a show of hands, because Vicki Agron and the ethical will, it moves people, it inspires people. She has really simple exercises that start with, here's a blank sheet of paper, draw, like my Boston accent just came out right there. Here's a blank sheet of paper, draw a line on it. The far left is, the early stage of your life, and the far right is you being gone. Where are you in your life? And the minute you do that one thing of drawing a line and putting your line somewhere, you're like, oh my gosh, like I did it recently with Vicki and was like, My life is like half over. And that's hard to digest because we are given such a short period of time on this planet. Even if I'm guaranteed 80 years, my life is half over. And so when you start thinking about, and the questions we've put in here, again, there are hundreds of questions when it comes to drafting an ethical will. These are the ones I pulled out because I like them and they help inspire or to start that story. But great worksheet. Again, we're going to give you all of these. You can edit them, make them your own. Nothing is copyright. And my little workbook, it's, you know, it's also a little self-serving because I want to advertise some of the money makers I have, since I do this all free of charge for the community so they can learn and benefit and learn how to tell their story and maybe contemplate doing a legacy fund. I also want to sell the products that I offer. So I give them a donor advised fund worksheet so that they can figure out if a donor advised fund is right for them. This is also a great follow-up because they have it in the workbook and maybe they don't know how to do it. So you can follow up and start the conversation with them. When you do this, sometimes they might say to you like, no, I'm not interested in that. It's not right for me. But in some cases they will. And then there's different levels of the donor advised fund. So our pilot event, and I have a guest, my son here, he just got off the bus. So he gets dropped off at the JCA.
No, I need this pencil.
He needs a pencil. He's going to go out to the conference room and do his homework. So after our first boutique style event, I had a woman call me and she was like, I don't know if we're wealthy enough for a donor advised fund, but I was looking at the workbook and I filled this out and I realized we support like 13 charities a year. And this makes sense to me. Like this would streamline our charitable giving. And I really think it would be the best next thing for us. Well, last week she opened a donor advised fund. I mean, you just don't know what in the worksheets will speak to them, but something does. Next, we also love the endowment fund, but what we did here with this endowment fund worksheet was we simplified it. You see the visual there? We also took it down a level. We spoke to every donor, not just the mega wealthy that can leave a 6 or 7 figure endowment fund. Talk to every woman that's like, oh, I could do that. Not even just the Lions, but every donor. It's easy to multiply that times 4 for the average Lion gift. But when you show it in these increments and you also show the impact over 30 years, like 30 years after you're gone, you will have reinvested $46,000 in your community. And the $25,000 endowment fund is the equivalent of, I don't know, the $1,200 annual campaign donor. This is meant to speak to everybody, not just one type of donor. And again, I have different versions of this. I actually have this same graph, but created for the Lion at the $100,000 level. And instead of the pot with the seed growing, the flame gets bigger. So we have different versions of this worksheet, but this is the one we chose to include in the workbook. And it's also about starting that conversation about what do you want to leave behind and who do you want to provide for? Is it only the community? Is it only your children? But it's important to include them in the conversation as they are thinking about doing it. Every time a donor comes to me and say they want to create an endowment fund or they want to leave their IRA, I always ask, have you taken care of your children? Do you have children that you need to provide for? Do you have a spouse? Because that instance I shared with you at the beginning where the wife was not informed and those relationships were hurt because of that. Making them aware and also feel that you care about their family and their children is important because it also helps build trust. And I, during the pandemic, lost a gift because a dad came to me, a retired physician, and said he wanted to do something in honor of his father who had passed away. And I asked the question about children. And when he came back with his wealth advisor, they ultimately came to the conclusion that because of his adult disabled daughter, they needed to do a special needs trust before they could do a charitable remainder trust or something else. And so it hurt a little bit, but at the same time, it's what's best for the donor. And we work through our Jewish values. So that's important. All right. And finally, let's interact based on the realities in your community. Share what works and what resonates here and something maybe you've tried with women that's been successful. Anybody? Nobody? They're going to grade me if no one participates. I'm going to get like an F. Is it Donna?
Yeah.
Yes. Hi, Donna.
Thank you so much, Kelly. I'm really appreciating this. And I'm actually thinking about the leadership development program that I manage that actually is a low, you know, I ask for a personally meaningful gift toward the end of the program. But I do think often about how our volunteer leaders are most of the time women, and how it's an entry point for their philanthropic engagement as well. And so I'm curious how your workbook has also, and work in general, has kind of started from an entry point to then grow into donorship, a donor relationship.
Sure. So, and in not every instance, like of a woman who attended this event, did we succeed yet, right, in growing that relationship. At the first event we did have a couple women that they came kind of to us through partner agencies. They came to have the conversation, not because they were a Federation donor or invested in Federation and Foundation, but their interest was piqued and there's follow-up to be done. We have had some success with younger people entering into leadership. I actually present, so our young professionals leadership group is called Bridges. And then we also have a women's new initiative in leadership where we have a lot of, I don't want to use the word younger, but they are younger, right? They're younger than the standard Federation donor that's much older and attending Lion events. And we present at both of those and give them access to this information because we want to get them thinking about it. We have had an influx the last 2 years in moms, so mothers of teenagers participating in our next gen philanthropy group, which is enrolling their teenage child. But then it helps bring them to the table because through their teenager, they then become more connected to Federation. And many of the women that get involved through those avenues haven't historically been involved in Federation. Does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, and I love thinking about it from so many different dimensions of the individual themselves and then their teen or young, even younger children. There are a lot of avenues for entry. Thank you.
Yeah, there's so many, and like I feel like I attended the Lion event yesterday where we were on a battleship, and when we spoke and we sat down and I was, making my appeal for the Forever Lion, I said, but it's not just for the Forever Lion, right? It's for all your giving, wherever you're investing in the community, we can help you with that. And, of course we want to bring them in and we want them to connect with us and our mission at Federation, but we need to get to know more people. And if Federation isn't their cup of tea, there is still a place for them at the table, right? Like they can learn more about Federation and be involved in a different way. Right. Anybody else want to add anything? I got one more slide and then we're going to say goodbye. All right. So, of course, if there's anything to add or something you're doing, a strategy in your community, we would love to hear about it. Feel free to put it in the chat. Feel free to take yourself off mute. We want to know what's working and what's not. We've all had to pivot in so many different ways and at so many different times. It's, someone said to me recently, I just feel like I'm constantly in crisis pivot mode, crisis pivot, what's next? And it's true. It may never change, right? There'll be another election, there'll be another war, there'll be another hurricane. We just don't know. There'll be a flood. There'll be something and we will have to pivot again. But if we start asking different questions and trying to solve the problem differently, it might help us pivot in the end. So thank you all so much for attending. If you have any questions or want to talk or want to Zoom and look at anything specifically, I'm happy to do that with you. Here is my contact info, text, office, email. I'm happy to connect with you after this. And again, I do believe we're sending all these materials out, so you should get them. And then if you look at that and want to reconnect later, feel free to reach out. Thank you all so much for attending. I appreciate your time, and I hope to connect with you all once again soon. Take care. Bye-bye. think I have to turn the recording off, and Evan's gonna laugh if he's watching it and he hears my voice. Where do I do that? Stop recording. There's gotta be a stop recording button. Stop recording.